She stepped off that plane in Orlando with stars in her eyes and love in her heart. After months of romantic conversations with a charming mechanic she'd met online, this was supposed to be the beginning of her happily ever after. But within 24 hours, her dream had turned into a nightmare that would cost her everything. What started as passionate romance quickly transformed into deadly rage when he discovered something about her past, something she'd kept hidden out of fear. The question that haunts everyone who hears this story: what secret was she so terrified to reveal? Welcome to True Crime Journal HQ. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily update on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe. Alyssa Morgan came into this world on a crisp October morning in 1990, born to parents who immediately recognized their child's creative spark. Even as a toddler, she gravitated toward colors and textures, spending hours arranging her toys by hues and patterns, while other kids played with blocks. Her childhood home in suburban Ohio was filled with her artwork: crayon masterpieces taped to refrigerators, finger paintings covering every available wall space. By age 7, Alyssa had discovered photography through her grandmother's old Polaroid camera. She captured everything: autumn leaves scattered across sidewalks, her golden retriever Max chasing butterflies, rain droplets racing down window panes. Her parents quickly realized this wasn't just a phase. Their daughter had a genuine artistic gift. But as Alyssa entered her teenage years, life became more complicated. While her classmates seemed comfortable in their own skin, she struggled with feelings she couldn't quite understand. Looking in the mirror felt wrong somehow, like staring at a stranger wearing her face. The confident little artist began withdrawing from friends, spending more time alone in her room with sketchbooks and music. High school brought intense internal battles. Alyssa excelled in art classes but struggled socially, feeling disconnected from both male and female peer groups. She found solace in indie music. Bands like The National, Bon Iver, and Fleet Foxes became her emotional soundtrack. Their melancholic melodies matched her own feelings of being trapped between two worlds, neither fully fitting into either. Have you ever felt like you had to hide part of yourself to be accepted? That constant fear of rejection can eat away at your soul, making every social interaction feel like walking through a minefield. After graduation, Alyssa moved to Columbus for college, majoring in graphic design. Away from her small hometown, she began exploring her true identity. The city offered anonymity and freedom she'd never experienced. She started hormone therapy during her junior year, finally feeling like the person she'd always been inside was beginning to emerge. Her design portfolio flourished as her confidence grew. Professors praised her innovative use of color and composition. She specialized in brand identity for small businesses, helping entrepreneurs tell their stories through visual elements. One professor described her work as emotionally intelligent design that connects with viewers on a visceral level. Post-graduation, Alyssa landed a position with a boutique marketing firm. Her colleagues respected her talent, and slowly she began opening up about her journey. Most were supportive, but the fear of rejection never completely disappeared. She'd learned to read rooms carefully, gauging who might be safe to trust with her truth. Weekends became her sanctuary. Armed with her professional camera, a Canon EOS she'd saved months to afford, Alyssa explored Ohio's hidden gems: abandoned barns, forgotten cemeteries, urban murals in Columbus's Short North district. Her Instagram following grew as people connected with her unique perspective on everyday beauty. Music remained her constant companion. She attended intimate concerts at local venues, losing herself in the raw emotion of live performances. Friends knew they could find her in the front row, eyes closed, absorbing every note like medicine for her soul. Despite professional success and growing self-acceptance, loneliness crept in during quiet moments. Dating felt impossible. The vulnerability required terrified her. How do you explain your journey to someone who might not understand? When do you reveal the most intimate parts of your story? By age 33, Alyssa had built a beautiful life, but it felt incomplete. She craved genuine connection, someone who would love all of her, past, present, and future. The spontaneous road trips and artistic achievements couldn't fill the void left by romantic solitude. That emptiness would eventually lead her to download a dating app, hoping technology might help her find what her heart desperately sought. If hearing this already sends a shiver down your spine, subscribe so you never miss the warning signs in future cases. If you won't subscribe, comment why you'd ignore a chance to protect yourself. On a rainy Thursday evening in February, Alyssa swiped through profiles on her phone while her cat Milo purred beside her. Most guys seemed generic: gym selfies, fish photos, empty bios that screamed emotional unavailability. Then, Brian Keller's profile appeared, and something made her pause. His photos showed a genuine smile, not the typical forced grin she'd grown tired of seeing. He wore a simple flannel shirt in one picture, tools scattered across his workbench in the background. His bio read, "Mechanic who fixes more than just engines, love quiet mornings, good coffee and deeper conversations, looking for someone real in a world full of filters." Alyssa's finger hovered over the screen before she swiped right. The match notification came instantly. Within hours, Brian had sent a thoughtful message commenting on one of her photography posts, a black and white shot of weathered hands holding a coffee cup. "There's so much story in this image," he wrote. "I can almost feel the warmth of that mug and the weight of those experiences." Their conversation flowed effortlessly. While other matches sent generic, "Hey, gorgeous" messages, Brian asked about her artistic process, her favorite coffee shops, her thoughts on everything from vintage music to small-town secrets. He shared stories about growing up in Florida, his work restoring classic cars, weekend fishing trips where he'd sit in comfortable silence watching the sunrise. Late-night conversations became their routine. Alyssa would find herself texting until 2 a.m., forgetting about early meetings and morning responsibilities. Brian seemed genuinely interested in her mind, not just her appearance. He remembered details from previous conversations, asked follow-up questions about her day, sent good morning texts that made her smile during her commute. "I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to find someone who gets me," he texted one evening after they'd spent 3 hours discussing their childhoods, dreams, and fears about the future. But as their connection deepened, Alyssa's anxiety grew. When should she tell him about her journey? Some nights, she'd start typing explanations only to delete them, her heart racing with fear. Brian seemed open-minded, progressive even, but she'd been hurt before by men who claimed acceptance until faced with reality. She crafted dozens of messages she never sent, each attempt at honesty dissolving into doubt. The longer she waited, the more the secret felt like deception, even though she knew it wasn't. This was simply part of her story, not a lie to be uncovered. After 4 months of daily communication, Brian suggested they meet. "I know this might sound crazy," he wrote, "but I think I'm falling for you. I want to hold your hand, look into those beautiful eyes in person, see if this connection is as real as it feels through these screens." Alyssa's response was immediate. "Yes, I'd love that." But what Alyssa didn't know was that Brian wasn't exactly who he seemed to be online. The charming, understanding man she'd fallen for existed only in carefully crafted messages. The real Brian had a darker side that rarely surfaced in text conversations, a volatile temper that could explode without warning. This could be anyone's story. Your friend, your sister, you. Subscribe now so you never miss these real-life warnings. If you won't, tell us in the comments why you'd gamble with your safety. To everyone in Kissimmee, Brian Keller appeared perfectly ordinary. His neighbors saw him washing his truck on Saturday mornings, nodding politely when they waved from across the street. Co-workers at Murphy's auto shop knew him as the guy who kept to himself, showed up on time, and could diagnose engine problems faster than anyone else on staff. His small rental house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac where children rode bicycles and families barbecued on weekends. Brian maintained his lawn, paid bills on time, and never caused trouble. Weekend fishing trips to Lake Tohopekaliga were his escape, hours of solitude where he could sit in his baseboat, beer in hand, watching the water ripple in morning light. But Brian's calm exterior masked a psychological powder keg waiting to explode. His ex-girlfriend, Michelle, discovered this truth 2 years earlier during what started as a minor disagreement about dinner plans. When she suggested changing restaurants, Brian's face transformed. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "Don't you ever contradict me again," he hissed, grabbing her wrist hard enough to leave bruises. Michelle ended things immediately, but not before Brian followed her home 3 nights straight, sitting in his truck outside her apartment complex until she called police. The restraining order she filed painted a disturbing pattern. Brian couldn't handle rejection, criticism, or any challenge to his authority. His co-worker Jake witnessed another incident at a sports bar when a stranger accidentally bumped into Brian while walking to the bathroom. What should have been a simple, "Excuse me," escalated into Brian shoving the man against a wall, screaming about respect and boundaries, until security intervened. Do you know someone who seems normal on the surface, but has a darker side? These warning signs often hide in plain sight until something triggers the explosion. Brian's need for control extended to every relationship. Previous girlfriends described walking on eggshells, never knowing what innocent comment might set him off. He demanded constant updates on their whereabouts, checked their phones when they weren't looking, and isolated them from friends he deemed bad influences. His fragile masculinity couldn't tolerate anything that threatened his self-image as a strong, dominant man. Therapy was for weaklings. Emotional conversations made him uncomfortable. He measured his worth through outdated ideas about what real men should be. Tough, unemotional, always in control. This toxic combination of insecurity and rage had been building for years, waiting for the right trigger to unleash devastating consequences. Brian's online persona allowed him to hide these dangerous traits behind carefully chosen words and romantic gestures. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you are enjoying this content, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who is still watching. But none of Brian's past victims had posed the ultimate challenge to his narrow worldview, until Alyssa's arrival would shatter everything he thought he knew about himself. Flight 1847 from Columbus touched down at Orlando International Airport at 3:42 p.m. on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. Alyssa's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her carry-on bag, her heart pounding with anticipation and nerves. 4 months of conversations were about to become reality. She'd changed outfits 3 times that morning, finally settling on a flowing sundress that made her feel confident and feminine. Her camera bag hung across her shoulder. She planned to capture memories of what she hoped would be a perfect weekend. Walking through the terminal, she checked her reflection in every window she passed. Brian waited near baggage claim, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite, a detail he'd remembered from one of their late-night conversations. When their eyes met across the crowded terminal, both faces lit up with genuine smiles. The chemistry they'd felt through screens translated instantly to real life. "You're even more beautiful than your photos," Brian said, wrapping her in a warm hug that lasted just long enough to feel intimate without being inappropriate. Alyssa melted into his embrace, breathing in his cologne and feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her cheek. The drive to Kissimmee flew by in comfortable conversation. Brian pointed out local landmarks, asking about her flight and sharing funny stories about Florida's notorious drivers. Alyssa snapped photos through the passenger window, palm trees, roadside fruit stands, the endless blue sky that seemed impossible after Ohio's gray winter. "I can't believe you're actually here," Brian said, reaching over to squeeze her hand at a red light. "This feels like a dream." For dinner, he'd chosen Pier 60 Restaurant, a waterfront establishment overlooking Lake Tohopekaliga. The setting was perfect. String lights reflected off the water, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of jasmine, couples at neighboring tables sharing intimate conversations over candlelight. Server Jessica Martinez remembered them clearly. They seemed completely smitten, she later told investigators. He kept taking photos of her with her own camera, and she was laughing at everything he said. When she excused herself to the restroom, he asked me if the flowers on their table were pretty enough or if he should request different ones. The couple shared appetizers, feeding each other bites of coconut shrimp while discussing plans for the next day. Brian suggested visiting local art galleries, knowing Alyssa's passion for photography and design. She talked about her latest client projects, her eyes sparkling as she described helping a small bakery develop their brand identity. Other diners couldn't help but notice their connection. Elderly couple Harold and Ruth Peterson sat at the adjacent table throughout the meal. They reminded us of ourselves when we were young, Harold recalled, holding hands across the table, leaning close to whisper private jokes. You could feel the romance in the air. After dinner, they walked along the pier, Alyssa's camera clicking as she captured the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Brian's arm stayed wrapped around her waist, pulling her close when evening breezes made her shiver. Back at his house, they watched a movie on his couch, her head resting on his shoulder as credits rolled. Everything felt natural, comfortable, right. This was the moment when everything seemed fine, and it wasn't. Subscribe right now so you learn to spot danger before it's too late. If you won't, type in the comments why you're willing to take that risk. But peaceful moments have a way of masking the storm clouds gathering just beyond the horizon. Wednesday morning started with coffee and promises. Alyssa woke to the smell of bacon frying and Brian humming in the kitchen, sunlight streaming through his bedroom window. For a moment, wrapped in his sheets, she felt the contentment she'd been searching for her entire adult life. "Morning, beautiful," Brian called when she appeared in his kitchen doorway, wearing one of his oversized t-shirts. He handed her a steaming mug, kissing her forehead with the same tenderness he'd shown the night before. But something felt different. The kiss was briefer. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. When she commented on how perfectly he'd made her coffee, he just grunted instead of the playful banter she'd grown accustomed to. Alyssa dismissed these micro-changes as morning grogginess, choosing to focus on their plans to visit downtown Orlando's arts district. The subtle shift became more pronounced during breakfast. Brian's questions grew more pointed, more personal. He asked about her dating history with an intensity that made her squirm. When she mentioned a previous relationship, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tell me about your last boyfriend," he pressed, his fork scraping against his plate with unnecessary force. Alyssa's stomach knotted. "There's not much to tell. We dated for about 8 months, but it wasn't right." "What wasn't right about it?" Brian's voice carried an edge she'd never heard before, not even in their most heated phone conversations about controversial topics. "We just weren't compatible," she said carefully, sensing dangerous territory. Brian set down his fork, fixing her with a stare that made her skin crawl. "Compatible how? Sexually? Emotionally? What exactly went wrong, Alyssa?" The way he said her name made it sound like an accusation. This wasn't the curious, supportive man she'd fallen for through text messages and late-night phone calls. This felt like an interrogation. The conversation continued throughout the morning, Brian probing deeper into her romantic past with each exchange. By noon, Alyssa felt cornered, exhausted by the constant questioning and growing increasingly aware that she was alone in a stranger's house hundreds of miles from home. When Brian asked directly about her previous sexual experiences, Alyssa knew she'd reached the moment she'd been dreading for months. Her hand shook as she set down her water glass. "Brian, there's something I need to tell you about myself," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes narrowed. "I'm listening." The words tumbled out in a rush, 4 months of carefully guarded truth spilling across his kitchen table. She explained her journey, her transition, her fear of rejection, her hope that he would understand and accept her completely. The silence that followed felt eternal. When Brian finally spoke, his voice was ice-cold. "You lied to me." "No, I didn't lie," Alyssa protested, tears already forming. I wanted to tell you when I felt safe, when I knew you cared about me as a person. You deceived me for months." Brian's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly, his face flushing red with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done, what people will think?" The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. Gone was any trace of the man who'd held her hand at dinner, who'd whispered sweet words in her ear the night before. This stranger towering over her looked capable of violence. "I thought you were different," Alyssa whispered, backing toward the kitchen doorway. "I thought you might understand." "Understand what? That you made me look like a fool? That you've been playing some sick game this whole time?" Brian's voice rose to a shout, his fists clenched at his sides. Alyssa's flight instinct kicked in, but she was trapped in his house, in his neighborhood, with nowhere to run. Neighbor Patricia Williams was tending her garden next door when the yelling started. At first, I thought maybe they were just having a normal argument, she later told police. But then I heard her crying, pleading with him to calm down. His voice got so loud and angry that I considered calling someone. Alyssa's mind raced with regret and terror. She should have told him sooner. She should have stayed in Ohio. She should have listened to that voice in her head that whispered warnings about meeting strangers from the internet. But this was only the beginning of Alyssa's nightmare. The afternoon dragged on like a nightmare Alyssa couldn't wake up from. Brian paced his living room like a caged animal, muttering under his breath about betrayal and humiliation. Every few minutes he'd stop and glare at her with such hatred that she pressed herself deeper into the corner of his couch. "I need to use the bathroom," she whispered around 4 p.m., her voice hoarse from crying. Brian's eyes followed her every movement as she walked down the hallway, his presence suffocating even from across the room. In the privacy of his bathroom, Alyssa's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. Her friend Rebecca had sent several worried texts throughout the day. "Girl, how's Florida? Did you meet Prince Charming yet?" "Alyssa, you always respond by now." "Getting worried. Call me when you get this." With shaking fingers, Alyssa typed what would become her final message. "He's acting strange. I think I should leave early." She hit send and immediately regretted it. What if Brian saw the message? What if he checked her phone? The fear of making things worse paralyzed her. When she returned to the living room, Brian was standing by the window, his broad shoulders rigid with tension. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his carpet, making the familiar space feel foreign and threatening. "Who are you texting?" His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Just letting people know I'm okay," Alyssa lied, clutching her phone to her chest. Brian spun around, his face twisted with rage. "Don't lie to me again, you've done enough lying." The volume of his voice made her flinch. Through the thin walls, she could hear a dog barking in response to the shouting. Somewhere, a lawnmower hummed as life continued normally, just feet away from her personal hell. What would you do if you felt trapped in a stranger's house? Every instinct screamed at her to run, but where could she go? She didn't know the neighborhood, had no car, and her return flight wasn't until Friday. As evening approached, Brian's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd disappear into the garage for 20 minutes, returning with grease-stained hands and wild eyes. The sound of tools clanging echoed through the house, each metallic crash making Alyssa's heart race faster. "Please," she begged, when he emerged from another garage session, his knuckles scraped and bleeding. "Let me call an Uber. I'll go to a hotel. We can just forget this happened." "Nobody's going anywhere," Brian snarled. "You think you can just waltz into my life, make me look like an idiot, and then disappear? That's not how this works." The walls seemed to close in around her. Every window represented escape, but also exposure. Every door led either deeper into his house or toward his unpredictable fury. The Florida heat made the air thick and suffocating, even with the air conditioning running. Darkness fell over Kissimmee like a heavy blanket. Streetlights flickered on outside, illuminating a normal suburban evening where families gathered for dinner and children played in yards. Inside Brian's house, the atmosphere crackled with violent potential. Alyssa curled into a ball on his couch, her phone clutched in her palm, praying Rebecca would somehow sense her danger and call for help. But as the hours ticked by and Brian's pacing grew more aggressive, she realized no rescue was coming. The man she'd traveled hundreds of miles to meet had become her captor. The dream weekend had morphed into a waking nightmare with no clear exit strategy. If you think this story makes sense, share it with your loved ones to protect them from something like this happening to them in the future. By midnight, Brian's restraint was hanging by the thinnest thread, and Alyssa could feel that something terrible was about to happen. In the darkest hours before dawn, when the world sleeps and evil finds its courage, Brian Keller crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The exact sequence of events may never be fully known, but forensic evidence would later paint a horrifying picture of Alyssa Morgan's final moments. What began as a heated argument had escalated throughout the night into something far more deadly. According to the coroner's report, the attack started with blunt force trauma. Dr. Patricia Coleman, who performed the autopsy, determined that multiple impacts to Alyssa's head and torso occurred in rapid succession. The pattern of injuries suggested she had tried to defend herself, her arms bearing defensive wounds that spoke to her desperate fight for survival. But Brian's rage wouldn't be satisfied with violence alone. The medical examiner's findings revealed that strangulation was the ultimate cause of death. In those final, terrifying minutes, as Alyssa gasped for air that would never come, her dreams of love and acceptance died with her. The woman who had captured sunsets with her camera, who had found beauty in abandoned places, who had bravely lived her authentic truth despite a world that often rejected her, that brilliant light was extinguished by hands that had once promised to hold her gently. When police arrived the next morning, they found Brian attempting to clean evidence from his kitchen floor. His clothes were stained with blood that DNA testing would confirm belonged to Alyssa. Fresh scratches covered his forearms, silent testimony to her final struggle. His knuckles were split and swollen, bearing witness to the brutality of his actions. The man who had sent romantic text messages just days before, who had brought sunflowers to the airport and chosen a waterfront restaurant for their first date, had become a killer. His fragile masculinity, threatened by a truth he couldn't accept, had transformed him into a monster. In a bedroom that should have been filled with whispered promises and gentle touches, investigators found a crime scene that would haunt them for years. The same sheets that had witnessed their first night together now held evidence of unspeakable violence. Alyssa's journey, which had begun with such hope and courage, ended in unimaginable terror. The authentic life she had worked so hard to build was stolen by someone who claimed to love her but couldn't love her truth. The next story like this could be in your city, and you might not even know it. Subscribe now so you're informed. If you won't, share in the comments why you're okay with staying in the dark. At 33 years old, Alyssa Morgan's story was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Thursday morning brought an ordinary dispatch call that would become anything but routine. Rebecca Martinez, Alyssa's friend from Ohio, had contacted Columbus police after receiving that final text message and hearing nothing since. Her persistent calls to local authorities eventually reached Osceola County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Carlos Hernandez arrived at Brian's address for a welfare check at 9:47 a.m. When no one answered repeated knocking, he noticed dark stains visible through a front window. The smell of bleach, unusual for a suburban morning, raised immediate red flags. Within hours, the quiet cul-de-sac was transformed into a bustling crime scene. Yellow tape stretched across Brian's driveway as forensics teams photographed every inch of the house. Detective Sarah Mills, a 15-year veteran of homicide investigations, coordinated the evidence collection with methodical precision. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Blood spatter patterns in the living room told a story of violence that contradicted any claims of accident or self-defense. Alyssa's luggage remained packed in the bedroom, her camera containing photos from their romantic dinner just 2 nights before, a haunting contrast to the horror that followed. Brian's attempted cleanup had been sloppy and incomplete. Crime scene technician Mark Rodriguez found blood traces under the refrigerator, in grout lines between kitchen tiles, and embedded in the carpet fibers. The bleach had actually enhanced certain evidence rather than destroying it, making blood detection easier under ultraviolet light. DNA samples from under Alyssa's fingernails matched Brian's genetic profile. His cell phone records showed no outgoing calls for help, no 911 attempts, just silence during the critical hours when emergency services might have saved her life. By Thursday afternoon, an arrest warrant had been issued. Police located Brian at his workplace, calmly changing oil in a customer's vehicle as if nothing had happened. When Detective Mills approached with handcuffs, he offered no resistance, no questions, no apparent surprise. "Brian Keller, you're under arrest for the murder of Alyssa Morgan," Mills announced, reading him his rights in the parking lot of Murphy's auto shop while his co-workers watched in shock. The evidence against him would prove insurmountable: forensic proof, digital records, witness testimony, and his own failed attempts to cover up the crime. Justice for Alyssa had begun its slow but inevitable march through the legal system. The news of Alyssa Morgan's murder sent shockwaves through her tight-knit community in Columbus, Ohio. Her parents, David and Linda Morgan, received the devastating phone call that no parent should ever have to answer. The daughter, who had filled their home with colorful artwork and laughter, was gone, her life stolen by someone she had trusted with her heart. "She was our light," Linda whispered through tears at a memorial service attended by hundreds. "Alyssa saw beauty where others saw ordinary. She made the world brighter just by being in it." David stood beside his wife, clutching one of Alyssa's framed photographs, a sunset she had captured during a weekend road trip, its golden rays now feeling like a final goodbye. Her colleagues at the marketing firm struggled to process the loss. The conference room where Alyssa had presented her innovative designs fell silent during team meetings. Her desk remained untouched for weeks, still decorated with the small succulent she had lovingly tended and printed copies of her latest brand concepts for local entrepreneurs. The case attracted national media attention, sparking difficult but necessary conversations about online safety and the unique dangers faced by transgender individuals. News outlets covered the story extensively, with many focusing on the broader implications of dating app relationships and the importance of meeting in public spaces with trusted friends aware of your whereabouts. Legal experts predicted that Brian Keller would face life in prison without the possibility of parole. The overwhelming evidence against him, DNA samples, digital records, witness testimony, and his failed cover-up attempts, left little room for doubt about his guilt. Prosecutors described it as one of the most clear-cut murder cases they had handled in years. But beyond the courtroom drama, Alyssa's story became a catalyst for important discussions about acceptance and love. LGBTQ+ advocacy groups organized vigils in her honor, emphasizing that everyone deserves to live authentically without fear of violence. Her death highlighted the stark reality that transgender individuals face disproportionate rates of violence, particularly in intimate relationships. The case also served as a stark reminder about online dating safety. Relationship counselors began emphasizing the importance of video calls before meeting, conducting background checks, and always informing trusted friends about meeting plans. Many dating apps updated their safety features in response to cases like Alyssa's. Mental health professionals pointed to Brian's explosive reaction as a textbook example of fragile masculinity turned deadly. His inability to accept Alyssa's truth revealed deep-seated insecurities that had been masked by his charming online persona. This pattern, controlling behavior, explosive anger, and violence when faced with perceived rejection, represents warning signs that could potentially save lives if recognized early. Alyssa's story reminds us that love should never come with conditions or violence. Her courage to live authentically, despite knowing the risks, continues to inspire others facing similar struggles. Where are you watching from? Have similar cases happened in your community? We cover these cases so you know the dangers hiding in plain sight. Subscribe now, and if you won't, leave a comment telling us why you'd ignore a lesson that could save your life. Alyssa Morgan's legacy extends far beyond the tragic circumstances of her death. Through her artwork, her photography, and her unwavering commitment to living authentically, she touched countless lives during her 33 years. The woman who found beauty in abandoned places and captured sunsets with her camera left behind a powerful message about the courage required to be yourself in an unforgiving world. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the violence faced by transgender individuals and the deadly consequences of toxic masculinity. But it also celebrates the transformative power of acceptance and the fundamental human need for genuine connection. Every photograph Alyssa took, every brand she helped create, every moment she chose authenticity over fear, these acts of courage continue to inspire others to live their truth, despite the risks. Her parents established a scholarship fund in her name, supporting young artists who, like their daughter, refuse to hide their light from the world. Brian Keller will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but Alyssa's impact reaches far beyond the confines of his hatred. She reminds us that love should lift us up, not tear us down, that acceptance should be unconditional, not dependent on meeting someone else's narrow expectations. To everyone watching, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your experiences, your own encounters with online dating dangers. Your voice matters in keeping others safe. If one person watching this subscribes and learns a warning sign that saves their life, Alyssa's story won't be in vain. Hit that button, and if you don't, write in the comments why you'd refuse a chance to protect yourself.